Picture yourself in a cold castle lit by torches that spit and hiss against stone. Beyond the windows, the Carpathian Mountains rise like the vertebrae of some ancient beast. It's the 15th century, and Europe is a chessboard of kings, sultans, and warlords. But in this corner, Wallachia, a sliver between Christian Hungary and the Muslim Ottoman Empire, the game pieces are soaked in blood. Tonight, you meet the boy who will grow into the man who earns the name Vlad the Impaler. And trust me, the vampire stories are the polite version. He is born in 1431 in Transylvania, in the fortress town of Sighisoara. His father, Vlad II, carries the title Dracula, a name inherited from his membership in the Order of the Dragon, a knightly fraternity sworn to defend Christendom against the Ottoman advance. In Latin, Draco means dragon, but in Romanian, Dracul means something darker, devil. From the beginning, the boy is marked by contradiction, son of the dragon, son of the devil. His childhood is not a cradle of safety, but a forge of politics, and he grows up learning that survival is just another word for suspicion. His father rules Wallachia uneasily, caught between the powerful kingdom of Hungary to the north and the rising Ottoman Empire to the south. Both sides demand loyalty, both sides punish betrayal. When Vlad is still a boy, his father is forced to make a choice. To guarantee obedience to the Sultan, he hands over two of his sons, young Vlad and his brother Radu, as hostages to the Ottoman court. Imagine the terror, a child torn from his home and delivered into the marble corridors of an enemy palace. The Ottomans call it diplomacy. Vlad learns another word for it, leash. The court is a world unlike anything he has known. Fountains, silks, mosaics, splendor on the surface, but beneath it is a place of constant danger. One wrong word, one hint of disloyalty, and a hostage might vanish into silence. The Sultan's power is absolute. The Janissaries drill with ruthless precision boys taken from Christian families, raised as soldiers loyal only to the crescent banner. Vlad watches, studies, learns. He picks up Turkish, Persian, the arts of war, and he learns hatred. His younger brother Radu thrives in this world. He charms, he flatters, he bends. He becomes beloved at court, so close to the Sultan that people whisper his nickname, Radu the Handsome. But Vlad does not bend. His pride is iron, and his resentment grows sharper than any blade. In his heart, he cultivates a seed of vengeance, watered by humiliation. One day, he swears, he will repay the Ottomans for every slight, every chain, every year stolen from him. When his father is murdered, and his elder brother Mircea buried alive by rivals, Vlad seizes his chance to return. Wallachia is not a kingdom of peace, but of wolves, nobles called boyars pulling strings, peasants crushed under weight, and foreign powers forever meddling. Vlad learns quickly that kindness here is not a virtue, it is a liability. Fear, however, is a currency everyone understands, and Vlad spends it lavishly. The stories begin almost immediately. Nobles who oppose him wake to find their kin impaled on long wooden stakes, the sharpened poles driven through the body in a slow, excruciating execution. It is not just punishment, it is theatre. Corpses swaying in the wind, lined in rows like obscene forests along the roads into his lands. Travelers enter Wallachia, greeted by the silence of the dead, and the message is unmistakable. Here rules a man who will not be challenged. Is it cruelty or calculation? In the 15th century, brutality is not rare, but Vlad elevates it into strategy. When the Ottomans send envoys to demand tribute, he has their turbans nailed to their skulls for refusing to remove them before him. When villagers resist him, they are emptied, women, men, children, all impaled together. It is horror as policy, and it works. His enemies are terrified to invade, his own nobles hesitate to betray. But in 1462, his greatest test arrives. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the same conqueror who took Constantinople, marches north with an army that dwarfs anything Vlad can muster. Some sources claim 100,000 soldiers, while Vlad has perhaps 20,000. The odds are hopeless unless you change the rules. Vlad doesn't wait for a daylight clash. He turns to night. In June of that year, under a black sky, he leads a raid directly into the Ottoman camp. His men carry torches, scream war cries, cut down sentries in silence. Chaos erupts. Tents burn, horses bolt, and thousands are killed before the Sultan even realizes what has happened. It is remembered as the night attack, a moment when one warlord turned terror itself into a weapon. The Sultan survives, but he sees something he cannot unsee, a commander willing to stake everything on fear. After the raid, Mehmed presses forward, only to stumble upon Vlad's most infamous creation. Outside the capital of Targovishte, the Sultan and his army encounter what chroniclers later call the Forest of the Impaled. 20,000 corpses line the road, each staked upright, the smell of death heavy in the air. Ottoman soldiers weep, vomit, break ranks. Even Mehmed himself recoils. Conquest loses its appetite. He turns back. Vlad, with a fraction of the forces, has stalled the empire through horror alone, and yet his story is not triumph. Wallachia is treacherous ground, and his allies are fickle. The same nobles he terrifies eventually conspire against him. His own brother, Radu, now loyal to the Sultan, becomes his rival. Vlad is betrayed, captured, imprisoned in Hungary. For over a decade, he languishes in chains while his enemies spread stories, some true, some exaggerated, of his cruelty. Did he dine among the impaled? Did he drink blood from golden goblets? These tales, whispered by frightened peasants and ambitious nobles, begin to twist into legend. Dracula, the devil's son, the monster prince. Released years later, he claws his way back to power, ruling briefly again before fate catches him one final time. In 1476, during yet another clash with the Ottomans, Vlad falls in battle. Some say he is betrayed by his own men, others say he fights to the last, surrounded. What is certain is this: his head is taken, severed from his body, and sent to Mehmed as proof. It is displayed in Constantinople, a final irony. Vlad himself impaled on memory, forced to stand eternal guard as a warning. His body's resting place remains uncertain, perhaps buried at a monastery, perhaps never found at all. And so the man becomes myth. Centuries later, Bram Stoker takes his name, Dracula, and spins it into a new kind of terror. A vampire prince in a crumbling Transylvanian castle, drinking blood, haunting London. Readers gasp, shudder, thrill. But here's the truth. The novel is fantasy, but the history is darker. Vampires kill one victim at a time. Vlad ruled through fear so absolute that entire armies broke at the sight of his handiwork. He didn't need fangs. He had sharpened wood, iron will, and a heart that beat only for vengeance. So here's the question. Could you have survived under Vlad Tepes? Could you have walked past forests of the dead and still sworn loyalty? Could you have bowed to a prince whose justice was measured in agony, whose mercy was suspicion, whose gift was terror? The vampire is bedtime story. The Impaler was real, and sometimes history is hungrier than myth. But Vlad's story doesn't end with his death on the battlefield. If anything, it begins there. A severed head can be displayed, but a reputation cannot be buried. His enemies made sure of that. The Ottomans had every reason to magnify his cruelty. What better way to justify their wars than by portraying Vlad as a mad butcher? The boyars of Wallachia, many of whom suffered under his punishments, spread tales of his mercilessness to stain his memory forever. Even his supposed allies, the Saxons of Transylvania, helped turn rumor into legend. They printed pamphlets in German woodcuts that showed Vlad dining among forests of impaled corpses, calmly raising a goblet as if enjoying the view. In one, he sits at a table surrounded by staked bodies, while soldiers carve up victims like cuts of meat. These illustrations are some of the earliest propaganda posters of Europe, cheap, dramatic, and terrifyingly effective. The truth was already bloody enough. Vlad impaled thousands, but in the retellings he becomes something more, a sadist beyond imagination. Stories claimed he cut off noses and ears, boiled people alive, burned villages for sport, that he invited beggars to a feast, then locked the hall and set it on fire, declaring he had ended poverty in a single night, that he dipped bread in the blood of his victims. Whether these tales were exaggerations, inventions, or rare truths, they worked. Vlad's cruelty was no longer just history, it was theatre performed across Europe in whispers, prints, and tavern tales. And in the cracks of those stories, folklore seeped in. Eastern Europe was already fertile soil for vampire myths. In Romanian villages, people whispered about the strigoi, restless spirits who rose from the grave, hungry for the blood of the living. Some were said to be suicides, criminals, or the improperly buried, cursed to roam forever. Others were believed to be sorcerers who transformed into animals and drank blood to sustain their unnatural life. It didn't take much imagination to see Vlad's cruelty aligning with those fears. A man who impaled thousands, who ruled through dread, who seemed half human, half demon. Couldn't such a man also rise from the grave? Over the centuries, the two streams, history and folklore, twisted together. Vlad the Impaler, son of the dragon, became Dracula, son of the devil. In villages, mothers warned their children that Dracula still walked, a shadow watching from the forests. Chroniclers in Germany and Russia wrote accounts that blurred fact and fantasy, each one darker than the last. Vlad's enemies had succeeded. He was not just a defeated prince, but a monster etched into memory. Then in the 19th century, the story was reborn. In 1897, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker published Dracula. Stoker never set foot in Transylvania. His research was stitched together from travel books, folklore collections, and scraps of history. Somewhere in his reading, he found the name Dracula, attached to a Wallachian warlord known for cruelty. To Stoker, it was perfect. The sound of it, harsh, foreign, devilish, carried menace. He borrowed the name, but not the man. His Count Dracula is not a warlord, but an aristocrat, elegant and eternal, with a castle on a mountain and a thirst for blood. And yet the shadow of Vlad lurks behind the pages. The real Dracula defended his land with terror. Stoker's Dracula invades England with the same. Both embody dread that spreads beyond borders. Both are predators whose greatest weapon is fear itself. The difference is that the Impaler's cruelty was all too human, while the Count's hunger is supernatural. Here's the irony. The myth may be less frightening than the truth. A vampire drains one victim at a time. Vlad ruled by draining entire populations of hope, mercy, and trust. A vampire kills in silence. Vlad killed in spectacle, turning death into a wall no army dared breach. The Count haunts nightmares. Vlad haunted reality. And yet, it is the vampire who has survived. Vlad's bones may lie lost in an unmarked grave, but his name lives on every Halloween, every horror film, every whispered tale. The devil's son, Dracula, who refuses to die. History made him a warlord. Propaganda made him a monster. Literature made him immortal. So when you hear the name Dracula, ask yourself which one chills you more. The pale count gliding through Gothic castles, or the flesh and blood prince who lined roads with forests of corpses to make the strongest empire in the world turn back. The vampire is legend. The Impaler was real. By the time Bram Stoker sat down in the late 19th century to write his Gothic novel, Vlad the Impaler was already centuries dead. His forests of impaled corpses had rotted into soil, his castles weathered into ruins, his bones lost to uncertain graves. But his name, Dracula, had survived, smouldering in old chronicles and folklore collections that made their way across Europe. Stoker found it in the dusty margins of history, and something about it clung to him. He never travelled to Transylvania. Most of what he knew came second-hand, travelogues by Western adventurers, Victorian compilations of Eastern European superstitions, fragments of history, written by outsiders who delighted in exaggerating tales from the edge of Christendom. One of the books he borrowed from was an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson, a diplomat who casually mentioned a Wallachian prince named Dracula, known for cruelty. Stoker lifted the name whole, dropped it into his story, and wrapped it in myth. But Count Dracula was not Vlad Tepes. He was something more Victorian, more symbolic. Stoker's vampire is aristocratic, elegant, almost seductive. He lives in a decaying castle that mirrors Europe's anxiety about old powers crumbling. He crosses oceans hidden in boxes of earth, arriving in London like a contagion. He doesn't just bite necks, he invades. And in that invasion, he becomes the embodiment of everything the British Empire feared in the 1890s. Think about it. Victorian London was the beating heart of an empire, flooded with trade, ships, immigrants, disease. The city was anxious about what came through its ports: foreigners, plagues, strange ideas. Dracula embodied those fears, a foreign invader from the east, slipping past defences, corrupting English women, threatening English bloodlines. He was xenophobia in fangs, the fear that the empire's strength could be sapped by outsiders it couldn't control. But it wasn't just foreign invasion Stoker's readers saw in him. Victorian society was also deeply anxious about sex, about women's roles, about what it meant to desire in a culture built on repression. Dracula's bite is not just murder, it is violation, intimacy twisted into horror. His victims, pale and trembling, are both corrupted and awakened. Mina and Lucy, the women of the novel, become battlegrounds for Victorian morality. Lucy infected with monstrous lust, Mina redeemed by purity. Beneath the Gothic shadows, Dracula is a coded tale about sex and shame. And then there's the plague imagery. In an age when cholera, tuberculosis and syphilis haunted London's streets, Dracula reads like a disease given human form. He spreads not through bullets or swords, but through blood itself, the most intimate and terrifying carrier. He is unstoppable because he is contagious, invisible until it is too late. The Count is less a man than a pandemic wearing a cape. So what did Stoker do? He took Vlad's name, the Devil's Son, the Impaler Prince, and used it like a hook. But he filled the body with his own era's nightmares: immigration, disease, forbidden desire, the collapse of empire. That's why Dracula has lasted, because he was never just about one man in Wallachia, or even about vampires at all. He was about fear itself, dressed in the costume of the moment. And here's the irony: Stoker's Count was imagined in Victorian London, but he owes his immortality to the shadow of Vlad. Without Vlad, Dracula is just another vampire. With Vlad's name, he becomes history, fused with horror, a figure who feels too real to dismiss. The myth is stronger because somewhere beneath the cape and the coffin lies the memory of a man who really did drench his land in blood. So when the world today celebrates Dracula on movie screens, in costumes, in endless retellings, it isn't just celebrating Gothic fantasy, it's remembering Vlad too, even if we don't realize it. The vampire lives forever not because he's undead, but because history and culture keep feeding him. Every age rewrites him, every fear gives him new teeth, and the name of the Impaler, centuries after his head was taken, still has the power to bite. Centuries have passed since Vlad Tepes fell on the battlefield, but his shadow hasn't dimmed. Instead, it has lengthened. Walk into any Halloween store today and you'll see him everywhere, even if you don't realize it. Fangs, capes, blood-red eyes. Dracula. The name has outlived kings, empires, even countries. It has gone global. It started with Bram Stoker's novel, but it didn't stop there. Hollywood sharpened Dracula's teeth and polished his cape until he gleamed on the silver screen. Bela Lugosi in 1931 gave him the accent, the stare, the hypnotic presence. Christopher Lee in the Hammer horror films gave him menace, a towering silhouette that dripped blood with elegance. By the time the 20th century was half over, Dracula wasn't just a character, he was an icon, as instantly recognizable as Sherlock Holmes or Mickey Mouse. And yet behind every portrayal, the whisper remains. This isn't just a vampire. This is a man who really lived. The movies may exaggerate, but Vlad's cruelty doesn't need exaggeration. No special effects could match forests of the dead lining the roads of Wallachia, corpses left to rot as crows circled overhead. No Halloween prop could capture the horror of peasants forced to live under a ruler who turned punishment into spectacle. Still, the myth feeds on the man, and the man feeds on the myth. Today, Transylvania has learned to live with Dracula. Tourists flock to Bran Castle, marketed, not entirely truthfully, as Dracula's castle, where gift shops sell mugs, T-shirts, and bottles of blood-red wine. Halloween festivals in Romania play up the legend, and tour buses rattle through misty Carpathian valleys, promising travelers a taste of the vampire's homeland. It's commerce built on cruelty, memory turned into marketing. Somewhere, perhaps, Vlad would appreciate the irony. But peel back the costumes and capes and you're left with the uncomfortable truth. Vlad was not immortal. He did not drink blood. He did not rise from the grave. He was something worse, a human being who wielded fear with such mastery that empires turned away, terrified. His victims didn't vanish into Gothic castles. They screamed on sharpened stakes for days, left alive long enough to be messages in flesh. His genius was not supernatural, it was psychological. He understood that terror, used correctly, is stronger than any army. That's why the vampire has lasted, not because we believe in monsters with fangs, but because somewhere deep down we recognize the reality that inspired him. A ruler who weaponized fear, a man who made cruelty into currency. The vampire may be fantasy, but the Impaler was fact. So the next time you see a Dracula mask at Halloween, or a black and white film flickering with Bela Lugosi's gaze, remember what's behind it. Not just the cape, not just the coffin, but a boy stolen as a hostage, a prince who grew into a predator, a warlord who ruled through forests of the dead. The vampire is bedtime story. The Impaler was real. And sometimes history is hungrier than myth. As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.